Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Authors Love Bookstores, presented by A Mighty Blaze. I am so excited for today's show. My name is Kimberly Hensle Lowrance, and I am your host today. I produce and host this show in conjunction with fellow writer Joe Moldover. Here on Authors Love Bookstores, we bring to you conversations between authors and their favorite independent bookstores to shine a light on storytelling, creativity, and the small businesses that enrich our community. This is our 84th episode, and I am thrilled to welcome Deesha Philyaw and bookseller Arlan Hess to the show. Welcome, Deesha. Welcome, Arlan.
Thanks for having us. Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you for having us.
So, before we get into all the questions, I would like to introduce Arlan and Deesha to you a little bit more by sharing their bios. So let's begin. So, Deesha Philyaw's debut short story collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, was one of my favorite reads last year, and I'm not the only one. It won the 2020 Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction, the 2020-2021 Story Prize, and the 2020 LA Times Book Prize, the Art Seidenbaum Award for First Fiction. The collection was also a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies is currently being adapted for television by HBO Max, and Tessa Thompson is executive producing. I think my head exploded when I read that. Deesha is also the co-author of Co-Parenting 101, Helping Your Kids Thrive in Two Households After Divorce, which she wrote in collaboration with her ex-husband. Her work has been listed as notable in the Best American Essays series, and her writing on race, parenting, gender, and culture has appeared in a number of publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, McSweeney's, The Rumpus, Brevity, Catapult, I can go on and on, Ebony, ESPN, and Deesha is also a Kimberly Fiction Fellow, and she will be the 2022-2023 John and Renee Grisham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi. Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Fantastic.
For all of her.
So fantastic. Arlan Hess, I think I didn't breathe the whole time. Arlan Hess
is not as long.
No, yours is just as wonderful. Arlan is a writer, editor, and small business owner. She received her MFA from the Vermont College of Fine Arts, and her writing has appeared in a number of publications, including the Pittsburgh Quarterly, the Literary Bohemian, the Journal of Evolutionary Psychology, which I think was my favorite one on the list, and USA Today. Arlan was the co-founder and poetry editor of Paper Street, a Pittsburgh-based journal of poetry, fiction, and interview, and she was a professor of literature and writing at Washington and Jefferson College. In 2015, she bought City Books, which is Pittsburgh's oldest bookstore. In addition to all of this, Arlan leads tours around the old Allegheny West neighborhood of Pittsburgh, art and literature tours, and she hosts a book show about Pittsburgh authors and topics relevant to Western Pennsylvania and the tri-state region. Whew. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. So wonderful to hear more about you. And you were here today because as I will probably say about 4 dozen times during this conversation, love this book, and wanted to talk to Deesha. And so when we extended an invitation to you, Deesha, you wanted to talk to City Books. So we're thrilled to have you here. And I was, in preparation for this conversation today, I came across an interview that you did in the Kenyon Review, in which Deesha, you described City Books as a wonderful friend to writers. There's a warmth and an intimacy there that makes it so much more than a place to buy books. Can you tell us about your connection to the store? What makes it special? Why did you want to talk to Arlan today?
So I've been thinking about this. I think my first time at City Books, I thought it was for an event, but I think I was there before. I was there before my friend Abir Hawk had her book launch event at City Books, but I always sort of date my relationship with Arlan and City Books as Abir's book launch event, but I do have the sense that I had been there before. But this event was for a friend who was launching her memoir called Olive Witch. And I was one of the readers, sort of the opening acts, along with fantastic poet from Bangladesh named Tuhin Das. And I got there super early because I'm either early or late. There's no in between. And Tuhin was also there early. And so I just remember sort of sitting there nervously in the chairs, and the bookstore felt like something out of a YA novel, like something like, something, because of the big shelves and the old books, some of the books are older, and it just had this wonderful atmosphere. I'm someone who loves bookstores and libraries, but for me growing up, bookstores were always, like Walden Books or, the chains. And so, I have come to love an independent bookstore and just the feel of it. And so then Arlan was there. And Arlan is just, the icing on the cake in terms of just being warm and welcoming. And just, that was an actual celebration, a celebratory night for a particular author. But, I've come to know that Arlan celebrates writers as a fellow writer herself every day in what she does. And there's just so much love and thought and care that goes into her work as a bookseller, and and as I said, as a friend to all of us and to our work.
Oh, Deesha, that's pretty sweet. Thank you. Thank you. A lot. And I too date our official introduction as that night. And actually, I would say most of our interactions have been with a beer in the room. Probably.
Yes.
Yeah, she really did bring us together.
Yeah.
Arlan, your bookstore was founded in 1984, and you became the steward, as we mentioned at the beginning, in 2015. What made you want to become a bookseller? And then can you also talk about the mission of the store? Because you have some really nice writing on your website about your purpose for having the website, your goal for having the bookstore, rather, your goals for having City Books. We'd love to hear more about that.
Right. I suppose somewhere way back in my childhood, I did have the fantasy of wanting to own a bookstore, but that was not something that I pursued over a period of time. In my 20s, I was in finance, and I went back to graduate school when I was 29, and I got my MFA, and I started teaching. So I taught literature and creative writing through my 30s and most of my 40s, but then I got tired of teaching. And this bookstore, City Books, had been a landmark in Pittsburgh ever since I could remember. So I graduated from high school in 85. So most of my adult life, City Books was on the South Side. And when I found out that it was closing because the former owners were retiring, it just seemed like a really easy thing to jump into, because I have been pushing books my whole life. I've been reading them. I've been trying to write them, or writing somewhat, or, trying to teach books and spark that enthusiasm in other people. So it was a really good fit. I was very lucky that a lot of people still think that owning an independent bookstore is a losing proposition, which I'm here to tell you it's not. So I guess that I decided to remake City Books, or to drag it into the 21st century in the image of the bookstore that I always wanted to see. I always wanted to grow another woman that I wanted to be, but I also wanted this to be a bookstore. If I was going to have a bookstore, it was going to be my dream bookstore. And that meant that it was a place where readers and writers could come together, where conversations could happen, because I don't believe any of that happens in a vacuum. And I also very much believe that independent bookselling is community bookselling, and you can't be a community bookstore without really trying to give back to the community. My grandfather, my dad's father, was in business for many years. He owned a men's clothing shop in New York City. And my dad had always said to me, if you put your customers first, your customers are going to be there for you when you need them. But if you put your business first, your customers aren't going to be there for you. And that is something that just comes really naturally to me, being a part of the community. So what I found out was that when the pandemic happened and we had to go into our lockdown, first of all, when, I just said, hey, we're going to lock down. I didn't even say, throw money at me, but people were there. And I feel more a part of the community now than I even did when I bought the bookstore.
I mean, I think one of the things we learned during the pandemic was how much we value these things that are being taken away from us. Sometimes it takes a terrible situation for us to realize what's important, which is like sort of a limitation of being human, I guess, right? I know for me, I went to my local bookstore and bought books before I bought groceries when we had the lockdown, right? So I understand that your community was there for you. That's terrific. That's so good to hear.
I will never forget that those 4 or 5 days in March 2020 before we actually locked the doors. I made the announcement, I think on a Wednesday, that our last day of business was going to be on Sunday indefinitely. And it was like locusts. People came in and, I'm going to get a little overwhelmed just thinking about it. When I left to the bookstore on that Sunday afternoon, I didn't bother cleaning it up. And I didn't know when I was coming back. And I just walked out and locked the door. Oh, we were all so scared then, remember? Yeah. And we have one of the things that I brought with me from the old store was this very iconic neon sign that says City Books, which is on all the time. I don't turn it off. It doesn't drain that much energy. It's like pennies. But I turned it off before we walked out, not knowing if it's going to go back on. And I love this city. I love bookselling. It's great.
And one of the books I'm sure you love to sell.
It's an easy sell. Yeah.
It's a glorious sell too.
It is.
Thank you.
So this book, as I mentioned at the top, many awards. I know I recommend it to everyone when they ask for a book recommendation. And the reviews are terrific. Kirkus says, tender, fierce, proudly Black and beautiful, these stories will sneak inside you and take root, which I think is so true. The LA Times calls this book compelling, finding connection between your work, Deesha, and the writings of Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. And the list goes on and on about all the wonderful feedback. This book is a short story collection, 9 stories. And I could read the text, the publicity text about the book, but I'd love for you to tell us in your own words, what is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies about?
In a nutshell, I think it's about getting free and what it costs to get free, how different people go about getting free, and in particular for Black women, for Black Southern women. What are the things we weigh? What do we have to let go of in order to get free? And what are we trying to get free of? And in these stories in particular, it's rooted in the things that the church has taught us or demanded of us. And our families, our mothers by extension, have also sometimes taught us and demanded of us that costs us freedom. And so how do we navigate our way back to ourselves and our true desires?
I read an interview in which you talked about your childhood growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, and going to church with your mother and your grandmother, and you were wondering about their lives. Their lives are independent of you as a child. And my understanding is that sort of the women in your life growing up were somewhat of the inspiration for these stories. Is that correct? That you found?
Yeah. So, and it was interesting because my mother and my grandmother, because they both raised me, they were both single mothers. They sent me to church. They didn't go, and I think they felt unwelcome at church as single mothers. But there were the women who were inside the church, and then the women who were outside of the church. And as a girl, I'm trying to understand, what does this mean for me? Who can I become? This idea, there were so many binaries that were so not how the real world works, to be are you going to be a good girl or a bad girl? You're going to go to heaven or hell, and of course we know that life is way more complicated than that. And so I was very curious about the women in church and how did they navigate having these very human desires, which I started to have, as an adolescent, with doing what was right, or at least what was taught to us was right for women. And oh, by the way, there's this hypocrisy and double standards that are gendered, that I didn't have the language for as a child, but I certainly had observed. And so there, here's what I'm supposed to be doing, but is that real? Do they have secrets? Even as a child, I wondered about that. And then comparing the women in the church to the women outside the church, who seem to be having a lot more fun in many ways. I certainly like the tight jeans and the high heels and drinking and playing. Well, I didn't like the drinking, but but they see, and so it was like, oh my gosh, these women are so wonderful and beautiful and they're having fun, but they're going to go to hell, So what does that mean for me? And then, the women in the church, being really chaste and so forth, what were their real lives like? So those questions were planted early on, even though I didn't have the language for them, but they stuck with me. So then when I came into my own womanhood and adulthood, there were implications for me and the decisions that I made. And then looking back at my life growing up, and then once I became a mother and was married and did all the things right, why wasn't I happy? And so that was the beginning. That's sort of where I was 20 years ago when I started first writing fiction. And I didn't think that I was writing about these church ladies. I thought I was writing about dissatisfied women because that's what I was. But I was definitely looking back with some nostalgia and sort of mining my memories.
There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk in the world of fiction about the way writers take from their own lives. They take inspiration from their own lives. And I'm curious, both of you as writers, what is it like to plumb your own life for ideas and inspiration and turn it into fiction? Because it's fiction. It's not the truth of these women. Right. You didn't know, the characters in this book, they didn't exist exactly like this, right? Maybe the peach cobbler recipe existed exactly like this, but these women didn't. They're sort of your own imagination, but they have a spark in something kind of lit that fire. How do you do that with respect to people who may feel like they recognize someone themselves on the page? How do you honor those people, but also take it in directions that are different? How do you walk that line?
Arlan?
Well, I tend to write poetry. I have an MFA in poetry. So I tend to write about myself, I guess, and my experiences and my thoughts and my memories. And I don't think I've written anything in my poetry that would directly be calling out anybody. Although I haven't written poetry since the very beginning of the pandemic, and I've been working on 2 longer fiction projects, which probably will never go anywhere. But that's embarrassing to call myself a writer in Deesha's presence, to be honest. But
stop that.
No, seriously. But I think the one that I'm the furthest along in, I think I've changed the character enough, the absent protagonist enough that person will not recognize themselves. But that person's there, let me tell you. So literally, when that person dies in a fire, it's me burning some of my past to the ground.
And we get to do that.
Yes. This is the catharsis of writing.
Yeah. And Arlan,
enough in that answer. All of my friends and family who are writing, who are watching, are going to be like, "Oh my God, I hope it's not me." It's not.
I kind of follow the same rule of thumb, which is I don't want, it's a fine line, because one of the things that I love hearing from people who read the book is, oh, I could relate to that, or that was so me, or somebody I know, but I don't want an actual person I know to be like, that's my story right there, And so I think that's our job as, writers, using our imaginations to, take, I think of it as a kernel of
Mhm.
something that's true and real, and then build a whole other world or character around it that's even, it can be infinitely more interesting
Mhm.
and dramatic and problematic and messy and funny than real life. There's just so many options with fiction. And Arlan, I would just say, never say never, because the novel that I'm working on, I started in 2007. And I am not going to say, even all these years later, I still consider myself working on that novel,
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't count yourself out. But there are kernels of me in Church Ladies. There are kernels of my mother in
Mhm.
Church Ladies. But there's no one character that's her or me. And Arlen, I thought what you were going to say, but you write your poetry about yourself. But I've heard poets, friends of mine, say they don't like that people assume that all poetry is autobiographical,
Right.
and to give poets credit for also being imaginative and creative. And so for me, I figured I had 9 stories and, so many characters, I couldn't possibly be all of them, and so it would kind of throw people off the trail of like, which part, where are the kernels? You'll never know. So, except when I tell, like there's Dear Sisters, a story in the collection that there's a kernel that's definitely me.
Mm. So if I can, my poetry, I certainly have written plenty of poems that aren't in the specific about myself, but there's something about, the feeling or the frustration that I hope that I'm trying to express. But I want to say that's something about Deesha's book that really drew me to it so much, which is that so many of the things that these women are going through are universal.
Yes.
So there's this element of telling the story in the specific,
Mhm.
but it's because I have a sister, and I have certainly sat with family members who were, who had dementia or who were in nursing homes, and I understand that sadness and that frustration and that desperation and the self-doubt that so many of these women feel. While the book is about Black women church ladies, it's not limited to that in any sense of the word. There's definitely. I kind of expected that you might ask me the horrifying question, which was your favorite story in the collection?
And so, no, because it's like choosing your favorite child.
I've been thinking about that, and I'm like,
I wouldn't ask that question, Arlan.
I don't think I could do that, because there's something in every story. And there are some of the stories had me cheering. Yeah, go girl. No spoilers, but burn that thing down. And then the folding the fitted sheets. There were things that like, yes, give it to me, Deesha. This is good.
And that's what you want as a writer, that's really, really, really what you want. Thank you.
Arlan, I love what you're saying, because actually my next question was about the universality of this book. There's a great piece in Slate, and we'll put it below, that talks, is an interview with you, Deesha, talking about this book. And it says, by plumbing Black desires and intimacy, Philyaw conjures a depth of relationship and emotion that can be universally understood and felt. And when I read this book, I'm a white woman who's lived mostly in the Northeast. I have never been to a Black Southern church. I still understood these women's experience. Like, I felt like, I grew up in the Catholic Church in the Northeast, right? So like there's some connection to that that's very similar. And we've all had stories of loss and love and unrequited love and fear. I too cannot choose my favorite, but one of my 9 favorites in this book is How to Make Love to a Physicist. And, I love it because of the sort of, it feels like a call and release, a call back and forth, the question that's repeated. But there's also this, I was rooting for the character the whole time, and I was worried for her, and I understood her fear about letting herself be open to love. And so I feel like these stories, they're so vivid and true and real. And I think
Thank you.
any reader, no matter where they live or the
Mm-hmm.
perspective that they have or the story, their own story, can find themselves in these pages. And so, Deesha, I was wondering, when you were writing these
Mm-hmm.
stories, did you have an ideal reader in your mind?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you hope that your readers would take away from these stories?
I think in the back of my mind, I thought, even though Black women are not a monolith, that these were stories that most immediately, Black women, especially Black Southern women with church roots, would be able to relate to. But I also knew from, listening to Toni Morrison and to August Wilson, who were questioned, during their careers about how they exclusively wrote about Black people. And, there was not this, what in publishing they call the white gaze, right? Where, they're not thinking about, let's make sure, like, our ideal reader is white, so we got to make sure that they understand or that they feel seen or whatever. And they both sort of rejected not only that, but the idea that somehow they were limiting themselves by, writing the ways that they did. And they both, in their own way, sort of said exactly what, we've observed here, which is you can write about the specificity of Black life because our lives contain all of human experience. And so they're going to be these connection points for people who are not, Southern Black women. And so people make that choice to connect or not. And so I knew when I was writing that was possible. I didn't know if people would, but I kind of love that Morrison and Wilson gave me the permission to not worry about it. It's like, the people who need this book and who will be comforted by it or challenged by it, they will find it. Like, I had to just kind of trust that. And I, talking to other writers too, know that if we think too much about audience, you can get paralyzed. People ask me, like, did I worry about what the Black church, which again is not a monolith, but the traditional Black evangelical church, like, would people be upset? And I'm like, probably, but I think that, beyond that, there were going to be people who were going to feel good and feel seen and validated. And maybe the people who are upset, maybe it will spark a conversation, like a healing conversation. And I did hope that it would be clear that my intention was not to, like, give a middle finger to the church, but to really raise some issues that the church is long overdue to contend with.
I don't think it comes off as a smack in the face to the church at all. In fact, the church is, I think, pretty much an absent character. I mean, it's always there, but you don't see the church actively antagonizing any of the characters, I don't think. And if there is anything that I felt that I missed while I was reading these stories, was that I don't have that legacy of the church being that, involved in my life or that oppressive in my life. And I can imagine how much harder the lives of some of those women, I would have really understood how much harder their lives were if I had had that background.
Right.
Yeah. So I like that you didn't ever have to get in somebody's face and wag a finger about the church. It was just this omnipresent wall that I think some of these women were pushing against, pushing themselves against.
Yeah. And that's how a lot of folks experience it. It just is. And it's been absorbed into the culture, the ways that we think about, again, those binaries that whether we consider ourselves religious or not, they're imposed upon us in a secular way too. But those roots are certainly, there's still the connection to the church. And then, a lot of people, even when you leave the church building, you know, you're taking these things sort of with you, and there's some unlearning and some healing that, you know, that has to happen.
Well, these characters have internalized the church, right? Like they're carrying it with them. And I mean, even the two women in Snowfall, who another one of my 9 favorite stories in this book, you know, they live far away from the church and their families, and yet they're still carrying the expectations of them, which I think we all do, right? When we, even when we're far away, our family is still there, like on our shoulder.
Yep.
So for our audience, we're putting the link to buy The Secret Lives of Church Lady directly from City Books. There's a special link where you can pick up a copy. Please do. I loved it. And it's so terrific. And speaking of City Books, let's ask Arlan a couple of questions about the store. So tell us a little bit about the store. Deesha described it as sort of a YA novel, like a perfect bookstore.
Magical things can happen.
Well, magical, yeah. I have had people. I mean, usually my favorite thing is when people walk in the store and they gasp when they go, "Oh my gosh," because I definitely decorated it to look like everybody's wildest imagination of a used bookstore. Everywhere you look, there's something to see, whether it's like paper craft from books that were falling apart that I didn't have the heart to throw away, that I made into hats or I made into paper chains. There are antique Oriental, Middle Eastern rugs on the floor. The shelves all came from the original bookstore, and they're kind of a deep cherry red, but everything's a little banged up. You know, there are well, kind of like you can see behind me. This is our writer studio, and we can talk about that. But all over the store, there are like postcards hung up that people have sent me from different places. And there's thankfully the expectation of cleanliness in a used bookstore. The bar is really low, so it's cluttered and dusty. I can hear my mother laughing in the background. It's, you know, yeah. So I think if you want to imagine it as something out of a Disney creation or a Harry Potter creation, it's
definitely Harry Potter.
Color palette is dark. It's like evergreen and maroon and wood, and
it sounds wonderful.
And so I will say this as well. So and I also imagine that it's something beyond just the visual. I always have music playing, and usually it's jazz or it's like the Great American Songbook. And I usually have a candle burning because I carry a really great line of candles. They're very literary candles. So I hook people with every sense I possibly can, if just, you know, through the eyes and the ears and the nose and everything. So it becomes a memorable experience. So that's right.
So people, so they can buy books by coming into the store. They can, but you have some books that you sell on your website. You have a bookshop.org. Right. And then you also do this very interesting thing by selling books on Instagram.
I do. Yeah.
Can you explain what, like how you do that? There's like a book, is it a book a day you put on Instagram?
No, I put up 4 or 5 books a day. I put up, so right now, this very instant, the bookstore is closed to walk-in traffic because I'm a little freaked out about Omicron. Okay. So we haven't reopened after Christmas. And I did originally say we were going to reopen Saturday. I have to rethink that. We might go another week or two and just start again at the beginning of February because we're just kind of peaking here in Pittsburgh with Omicron. But so, yes, certainly people can walk into the bookstore, and this bricks and mortar location is a used bookstore. And as a used bookstore, my options to list would be Amazon or Abe or some other places, but not very. It costs me money to list on those sites, so I would have to sell faster on those sites to be able to recoup that money. So another bookseller here who is actually the bookstore is no longer in business. She used to sell on her Instagram page. So I do put up 4 or 5 books a day on our Instagram page, and followers can just comment and say, "Hey, can you hold this book for me?" Or they can DM me, and I will get back to them. I'll pull the book. I will mark it most of the time as sold, and they can Venmo me and I just mail it out. It's very old school. I'm the person that you're talking to. There's nothing automated about it. If people want to buy new books, I do carry some new books in the store, and exclusively those are local or regional writers. And I think I have a very small Pittsburgh section, so I may have 6 or 10 local books right now. I generally don't do self-published books. It's a little bit harder of a sale to do. So people can buy a few new books here, but they can also shop through our bookshop.org account. And all those books are shipped directly from the distributor, which is Ingram. So they can come in and order a new book. I'm happy to do it. If they're local and they want a book that they see on Bookshop, they would save shipping if they just called me and they can come and pick it up. Otherwise, Bookshop's going to charge you shipping.
And can you tell our audience about your writing residency?
Yeah. So I'm sitting right now in our little residency studio. This space itself used to be the bookstore used to be a barbershop. And so there's a bathroom on this side of me, and then there's a little teeny storeroom on this side of me, but there's a doorway here. And originally we had this space for books, but nobody really came back here. There would just be books against that wall. And as a result, it began to gather trash. There would be empty boxes back here. There are empty boxes beside me right now. And so people just kind of thought it was a storeroom. I never came back. So then in 2018, I guess the very end of 2018, we decided to use this space as a small art gallery. And we had little micro shows in here, and they were really successful. I enjoyed doing that. But then somebody approached me at the end of 2019 and said, I would love to just spend all of my afternoons in the bookstore writing. Have you ever considered having a writer's residency? I had not. At the time, I had no place to do that unless the people were going to sit on, out on the sales floor. So we long story short, we moved ahead with that. But then when we went into lockdown, we knew that we couldn't have any more art shows back here. So I just thought, well, let's turn this into the writer's space. And the writer's residency has really only existed the same length of time as the pandemic. So we have people coming. We just announced our 2 new writers in residence who will be starting back here on the 1st of February.
Great. We'll put a link below. Oh, sorry.
No, they can pull a curtain. It's very private back here.
Wonderful. So we'll put a link below for our audience to find out more about the writing residency.
Yeah, it's for locals. It's a local residency. We can't pay for transportation or for room and board or anything. So it's limited to Pittsburgh and regional writers who can get to the store.
Excellent. Deesha, your book is being made into a limited series, right? A limited series or a movie? A limited series?
Neither one. Just a series.
Oh, just a series.
Well, not just, but just a full series that I hope has many, many seasons. Fingers crossed.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I'm hopeful.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Tessa Thompson, I think I did like a head explosion earlier on.
Me too.
So tell us about what is that experience? I mean, you've had so much happen in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
The book is published, so much acclaim for it. Now it's being made into a television. Like so much has been happening. What has that experience been like for you to hand over your book? Well, you're involved in it. So tell us a little bit about this wonderful development, please.
So that was the nice, well, all of it's been awesome, but having multiple offers gives you leverage, as with anything. And so I wanted to be involved as a writer and as an executive producer. So that meant that, those were the kinds of offers I was looking for. And all it takes is for one person to say, yes, I'm willing to do that. And it, kind of spurs other people. But you sort of know when people are excited about you doing something versus them willing to let you do something. Mm-hmm. And, Tessa was one of the people who was very open and warm about me being involved, and it wasn't something she had to be sold on. There were so many things about the book that we had a similar vision on and focus on for the TV show. As Arlan pointed out, this isn't a book about the church. You know, it's a book about these women, and the church is sort of in their orbit and not the other way around. And that's something that, you know, Tessa and I feel is very important. You know, things like it's intergenerational. You know, all these women are not 30 years old. So there's, you know, that aspect of it. And then, you know, just the diversity of Black women, you know, and all of the ways that we show up. You know, these were things that she and I really connected over, as well as in our conversations with the HBO Max folks. It was just this wonderful, really beautiful alignment. And then this, you know, faith in me to actually be a part of that process as well. And so, but I do have a co-writer because I don't have screenwriting experience. So Tori Sampson and I have been doing the work building towards writing the pilot script. It's been a lot of fun visiting my characters again, making them older, looking at them younger, moving back and forth in time, building a world, because it's not an anthology series. So we'll be pulling characters from multiple stories and bringing them together over time. So we've been having so much fun with that and getting to answer so many of the questions that, you know, I've heard from readers, like, why was Olivia's mother like that in Peach Cobbler? What happened to Jael? You know? So we wanted to be fun for readers, and interesting to readers who, you know, people who've read the book, as well as people who have no idea what it's about at all. So, you know, something for both of those groups of folks. So it's been an honor and just a real joy.
Will you be involved in casting?
As an executive producer, yeah, you know, we'll and Tessa and I already have like a dream document. I mean, who knows, you know, but we've had the document for like a year, you know, just like every time I see an amazing performance, I just add that person's name. So half of Hollywood is now on our dream list.
Well, good.
What does your timeline look like? Do you have a?
We don't have one right now, but I've been managing people's expectation to say it's not like in a year, because a lot of people are like, is it next year? And you know, I would be very surprised if it was next year, but who knows? Because we really are just spending time with the characters and just, you know, trying to think about place, trying to think about timing and those sorts of things. And I'm so thankful that the HBO Max folks, they're not putting time pressure on us either, which is really nice. And yet Tori and I tend to work really quickly. Like we just sort of riff off of each other. And, you know, folks who done work in Hollywood, they talk, or even just in writing, you get notes, you know, you get feedback. And she and I are both the type where we get notes and we like let's just turn this right back around. Let's just, you know, here you go. And they're like, oh, you guys are, you know, that was quick. So nobody is pressuring us, but we are moving quickly because we're so excited about it. And just fall into this world and just, you know, just really delight in it.
Are you enjoying screenwriting? Is that something you want to do more of?
It's like a new muscle in terms of the, you know, the formatting kind of thing. But I think it's going to make me a better prose writer too, because there's just this, you have to do more with less. And you have to, like, your dialogue has to be tighter. Your word choice has to be really on point. And I'm really hoping that those skills transfer into my other writing, as well. But you know, it's easy enough to figure out, you know, the logistical things, but thinking about how everything is emotion, but also everything is visual. And how that has to work in every scene. That's challenging.
Exciting too, to try something new.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
We're actually like coming toward the end of our interview, and I haven't gotten to all of my questions, which is normally what happens. So if you can indulge me with a couple more minutes,
sure.
I wanted to say that what was exciting to hear from you about the series is that one of the things as a reader that happens when you finish a book or a short story collection is you wonder what happens next to these characters. So the direction that you're taking feeds that greedy reader inside of me and many others. Like, give me more. So that's thrilling. So I'm so happy to hear that. And we, of course, want our audience to read The Secret Life of Church Ladies, but we always get audience questions about what our guests are reading.
Yes.
And that's, people always want to know what you're reading. They're inspired by that. So Arlan, Deesha, I know you suggested some things before we started. You gave them to us. So our producer has them at the ready. So we'll put the links below for our audience so you can just easily find them. So Deesha, can you tell us what books are on your bedside table right now to read?
Yes. So I have two. One is The Movement Made Us by David Dennis Jr. in collaboration with his dad, David Dennis Sr. And it's a combination memoir and oral history. So David Dennis Sr. is talking to his son, but we get, his son's voice as well, and what it was like to grow up with a father who was so active in the civil rights movement. But what did that mean for him as a father? What did it mean for their family? And so we get that personal story, but then through the elder Dave Dennis's view, we get to see the civil rights movement in a very personal, upfront, very honest way. And so it's one of the best books I've ever read on the civil rights movement. It will just it changes the genre. And then finally, Imani Perry's South to America, by looking at the role of the South in the building of this nation, and I think in the subtitle, The Soul of the Nation. And Imani is just one of our greatest national treasures and writers. And so I will finish David's book today and we'll start that one tomorrow.
Great. Thank you for those recommendations. Arlan, what about you?
Cool. I can tell you, I like the idea of what I've just read, what I'm currently reading, what my next read is going to be. One of the recent books that I just finished is called No Place to Go. And the subtitle is How Public Toilets Fail Our Private Needs. It's a nonfiction study by a Canadian journalist named Leslie Lowe, who weaves in racism and gender bias and ableism and ageism, everything into how it affects our access to public toilets. And certainly I understand, you understand all of this, that all of these different groups suffer bias of some kind, but you know what it's like when you got to go to the bathroom and you need a bathroom right now. Well, what if you what if you got a stroller and it's downstairs? And how do you get your toddler and your stroller and yourself down these stairs? And then you find it's locked. And why is it locked? Because people don't want drug addicts being in there. But we really need a better system. There are some countries that have a better system, and we need to do that. And currently I'm going to finish tonight Punch Me Up to the Gods by Brian Broom. It's a memoir about a young Black man born and raised in Northeastern Ohio who's coming to terms with his sexual identity and just the extreme poverty that he grew up in, and how society forces men, but Black men in particular, to be a certain way in masculinity. He's judged by not just society as a whole from being gay, but by his own Black family from being gay. And it is heartbreaking and funny and raw, and it is one of the best memoirs I've ever read. And those are my two. The next book I'm going to read is Atonement by Ian McKeown, because somebody challenged me to read it. So that's my next book.
Excellent. Deesha, have you made it to the University of Mississippi yet? Have you started your residency there yet? When does that begin?
I have never been to Mississippi, period. But the residency starts in the fall. So it's for the academic year 2022-2023.
Okay.
And I can't wait. I am so excited to discover Mississippi. There's a big literary heritage there. And the food, full stop. So I'm so into it.
Wonderful. Congratulations for that.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Arlan, we have the last question always goes to the bookseller.
Oh,
you ready?
Yeah.
Please finish this sentence for us. Running a successful bookstore is part hard work, part luck, and part what else?
Media empire.
Ooh, we've
It's
never
all
done that one before.
I feel, well, because what were your first two? Sorry.
Hard work, luck.
Luck. Yeah, a lot of it is luck because there's not a lot of money. So the luck, that's where the scrappiness of the luck comes in.
Mhm.
I don't pay for any advertising. I don't have the budget for that. So my challenge has been to get in front of as many people as I can, as fast as I can, and to sustain that. So I have a very active social media accounts, not just Instagram, not just Twitter. I've really turned my back on Facebook for, reasons. I'm trying to be better with my YouTube account, but right now a huge part of my focus is our TikTok account.
Mhm.
So I'm constantly trying to come up with new content for all of those channels and then use all of those channels as funnels. People might say, how can you sell on Instagram with just the people who live in Pittsburgh? Well, I don't. TikTok through my Instagram is probably driving at least 50% of my business right now.
Wow.
So
Wow.
Keeps me busy.
That's fantastic and clever. We've talked to a lot of booksellers on this show, and I've not heard of someone who has embraced social media to the level that you have.
Well, here a lot of folks say, "Oh, young people aren't reading anymore."
They are.
They don't read. Well, I can guarantee you, because older people are the ones, generally speaking, who aren't social media savvy. So the people who I'm in front of all the time are like age 18 to 60. I'm in front of them constantly. So my biggest customers are millennials and some Gen Z, but my biggest customers are millennials because I went where they are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
that was desperation. That was pure desperation.
Well, we're gonna say that was a smart business move.
I knew exactly.
We're gonna say that a smart business move. Now I could talk to the two of you forever. But alas, that's not possible. Thank you so very much for being here today.
Thank
you. It was delightful.
So
It's great to see you, Deesha.
You too, Arlan. I can't wait to see you in person at some point when it's safe.
Yeah, me too. Before you leave, for sure.
Yes.
So to our audience, please, if you haven't already, this is a great time to purchase The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. You need to read it before the show is on HBO Max. And again, the link's below where you can buy it directly from Arlan. Thank you so much to our audience for being with us today. If you liked today's show, and we hope that you did, please subscribe to A Mighty Blazes page on Facebook. I know we're not all a fan of Facebook, but for those of you who are on Facebook, please subscribe so you can get notified about our events, or go over to our website, amightyblaze.com, to sign up for our newsletter. We broadcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, so you can watch into all of those channels. We'll be back in 2 weeks at 4 p.m. for our next conversation. Will be with Antoine Wilson and Diesel Books in California. And until then, be well and keep reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.